following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tony D'Angelo's PM Coast to Coast. Now, here's your host, Tony D'Angelo.
And a very good afternoon to you, all of our friends and fans up and down the coast and the stations of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm your host, Tony D'Angelo, and man, have I got a show for you. We are going to have absolute positive fun today. We're going to be doing two things and kind of blend it all into one. It's a little mix of a rain delay, and we've got a very special guest for you. Our throwback date is April 28th, 1967, which was the date that Muhammad Ali had refused induction to the U.S. Armed Forces. We're going to be looking at that, some of the other events of that day and that time, throwing back to what was happening at that point in time. We're also going to have a special guest on our show to start the new year. Our paterfamilias, our leader, Zig Tyko. Ralph Zig Tyko is going to be here. We're going to be talking about Howard Cosell, the events of April 28, 1967. And of course with Zig, you never really know where you're going to end up, but man, you're going to enjoy the trip and you're going to enjoy this show. So I'd like you guys to sit back, have a little fun, and we're going to be taking you out of here in a second. Got a little BTO for you. Let it ride, baby. That's the way this show is going to go. Let it ride, make it hurt. We'll be right back right after this.
Pauline, chapter 17. When last we left poor, pure Pauline, she had fallen into an open manhole and was washed up at the estate of Caspar Coleman, world's second richest man. Coleman and his Dr. Reinhardt are right now hatching a plot to marry 19-year-old Pauline to Coleman's 1-year-old grandson. Let's listen.
That's it. We freed her for 25 years.
And in the next thrill-packed commercial, you'll hear George Stedman, world's first richest man, discover that his beloved Pauline has been frozen solid and say,
Doctor, yes, freeze me up for 25 years.
And we, that's Universal Pictures, would like you to see The Perils of Pauline. It stars Pat Boone, Pam Austin, the Rebellion Girl, and Terry Thomas. We've made The Perils of Pauline because we believe it to be an important statement for our time.
We'll be right back with a special historical clip involving Muhammad Ali here on Comfortably Zoned Boss Radio.
Top Negro athletes meet with Cassius Clay to discuss his anti-draft stand. They include Bill Russell, Lou Alcindor, and former pro footballer Jimmy Brown. Says Brown after the meeting, the champ is sincere in his religious beliefs. He believes in his religion, and his stand is based wholly on that. Clay's induction refusal cost him his title, and he faces a possible 5-year prison sentence. He claims exemption as a minister of the black Muslim faith.
And that's what was happening on April 28th, 1967. The world heavyweight champ, Muhammad Ali, in those days it was Muhammad Ali, a.k.a. Cassius Clay, had refused induction to the U.S. Armed Services on the grounds, as the old Universal Ed Herlihy newsreel audio was saying, on the grounds of his Muslim faith. We all know, in retrospect, that this was a decision that was vindicated 8-0 by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1971. But what we didn't know at that time was the fact that Muhammad Ali would ever fight again, or would he be imprisoned. And he did have a number of friends, as you heard in the newsreel, who were prominent black athletes. Bill Russell, Jimmy Brown, Willie Davis of the Packers, Lou Alcindor, later Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who had supported him in his fight to maintain his resistance, if you will, to the war on moral and constitutional grounds. He had received a lot of hatred for that. Now, mind you, it was 3.5 years of exile for him, of which he could only go on talk shows and visit college campuses, and money became a very tight thing for him, and he had many temptations to just chuck it all and to accept his induction and get back in the ring, but he didn't do it. And this really, and we talked about this before on Comfortably Zoned Radio, this really was a time for me, being an older child or a young adolescent, if you will, when, the cartoon world, if it were, of boxing and, TV sports really became national news and started to tie into events of national prominence. And today, it's, we hear of these things and we see them, but this was really the first time, and it was just something that was really very shocking. Anyway, when Zig Tyko contacted me last night and said it's time to talk about Howard again, I went to bed with that. I got up once overnight with that. I germinated it around. I was messing around with it this morning, and he's absolutely right. So just in a moment, boys and girls, we're going to be having Zig Tyko here on Comfortably Zoned Radio. And I can't wait. So stay tuned for what will be an absolutely positively great interview.
Here are a few words from Jim Morrison of The Doors about the most exciting new magazine of our day.
This is Jim Morrison of The Doors, suggesting you can light your own fires and open your minds by turning on to a new magazine called Cheetah. If you can't cop a copy from a friend who has one, it's now in your neighborhood newsstand, with the kind of stories and pictures that really say something. There's Mama Cass on a field of daisies advertising flower power. There's a profile of Brian Wilson, the genius head of the Beach Boys. There's a report on the Boston scene from someone who's obviously been there, and more. It's a magazine with soul. Cheetah. For all you who are willing to let words and ideas ignite your imagination.
Cheetah magazine. It's got the words, the pictures, the thinking that makes it must-reading for a now generation. On sale now at your local newsstand.
Alerting all the stations up and down the line, we'll be right back with Ralph Zig Tyko, our fearless leader, right after this. Ladies and gentlemen, up and down the stations of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, I am honored and pleased to be joined by our leader today, the boss of Boss Radio, Ralph Zig Tyko. And
Hey, nice to be here, Tony.
It's always a privilege and a pleasure. And last night you said to me, it's time, we need to talk about Howard again.
Absolutely, and let me tell you why. I'm talking to my lover, my partner, Tally, and she is not a sports fan. She's somewhat younger than myself and didn't know at all about Howard Cosell, about the cult. He was a cult figure, and the reason I say that, I try to explain why people would throw bricks at their own television set. Because we were thinking about throwing a brick at CNN and Trump this morning, and we held off. And I want you to tell us, Tony, about what precipitated that the movement that the folks had. People would go to bars and throw bricks at the televisions. What was that about? When did that take place?
You mean why people would throw bricks at television sets because Howard was agitating them?
Oh, no. We know that his agitation could inspire that at any time. But who made it into like almost a Friday night event where people would literally set it up where they'd have bricks thrown at the televisions at bars and what have you. It was almost a comedic happening.
You know, and I'm going to profess my ignorance here. I don't know, but I will tell you this. I do know that Elvis Presley would sit at home at Graceland, and if he didn't like something on TV, he'd take out his Derringer and blow out the screen. That I do know.
Okay. We've all been tempted, I'm sure. Howard was terrific in a lot of ways. He was very troubled at the end. He lost his wife, Emmy,
yes,
of some 50-odd years. And I think that was the end of Howard as we knew him. He just lost it.
He really did his best. I mean, if you look at that whole crew in the beginning of the Wide World of Sports, and so much of that was, Arledge and Joe Assetti, and just, it was an amazing thing where they all tried to bring sports broadcasting to a much higher personal level and, succeeded. I mean, the whole idea of having a sports show on for 3 hours or whatever it ran on a Saturday afternoon, or maybe, in the beginning an hour and a half, that was unheard of. Sports was a little 15-minute thing, not even on the news. Mm-hmm. And they brought...
He was so big in New York locally that he got the national gig. He just, there was something about him, a presence about him that the Ali thing comes to mind. When Ali changed his name, I think Howard made it palatable for the country to accept him. I think it was one of the most wonderful civil rights moments in history, and he was cantankerous. How about that? Is that a good word?
Well, yeah, he was really a very driven perfectionist. I mean, he did have a problem with alcohol, sadly, and we didn't know about that until years later. He never missed a scheduled air date, even though it's been documented on more than one case when the shooting took place in Munich in 1972. He became so depressed he was nowhere to be found, and Gifford and Jim McKay had to carry that, which, to the network's credit, we never knew what was happening with Howard until years later. I mean, that was really the professionalism of the people around him, because it really troubled him that, Jewish people were being slaughtered in Munich, and that was, of course. But Howard did like his... he was a man of his time, and it was back in those days, people drank a lot, just about anywhere.
Right, but not on the air.
Not on the air.
And I think there was the old story about throwing up in Meredith's boot.
Yes.
Or, he did have some problems. Very few people know he was an attorney.
He sure was.
And he was in the military during the war, and he served his country as what was it, adjutant? Or,
yeah, he was. He worked Brooklyn. He was doing the legal work for the Army over at the Brooklyn Pier. As a very young man, he was only in his 20s.
Didn't know that, and then he was then everybody went into the service at 1943.
Yes.
And he came out. How did he get into the broadcasting business?
I think, if I recall, he was doing some journalism in his high school class in Brooklyn. He always had the sports bug, and he thought that, listen, the reason you're here, the reason I'm here, we listened for years and years and years, and we thought we could do a better job. And he tried to do little radio bits now and then I think the American Broadcasting Company, as they were then known, gave him a gig, if you were, for 6 weeks of monthly shows, and he quit his law practice and started from there, and that's what he did for his life's work. He just really, 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 really wanted to get what he felt was inside him out. I'll always admire him for that, because he really showed us a much better way of doing things.
He fought amateurs, as he called them.
Yes.
Ball players who would go from their careers into the booth. He fought that.
The jockocracy. Yes. Yes.
With that, though, he accepted Meredith and Gifford. That was, he didn't like it, but he accepted it. Am I correct on that?
Well, yeah, I think in the beginning he actually had a great regard for Gifford, which I think, he and Gifford, up until the time of Monday Night Football, Gifford was doing some evening news, sports reporting and things like that, and Howard was just kind of like, okay, that's Frank Gifford. And I think they always had a cordial relationship, maybe not a friendship, but when Gifford came, he actually started to really like Gifford and build a character around him. Now, Gifford, to his credit, a lot about Gifford, as we've talked about, a lot of good, a lot of not so good. He worked like a dog on those broadcasts. He would go, and Howard would always complain about the sponsors package on Monday Night Sports, because when they got into a city on a Monday, Howard would have to give the luncheon, and he'd have to MC the luncheon, and all the sponsors were in, and Howard would have to tell stories, and then he would then go to the stadium and work in the booth and do the highlights, the world-famous highlights. And meanwhile, Frank Gifford, and Howard really respected him for this, was back in the hotel room filling out little 3x5 cards. And on the 3x5 cards, he would have, I guess it was whatever the rosters were, whoever could be playing in the game. Every single card, he'd have one card for a player, the name, the number, the college, the position, and some little known fact about this player that would be interesting when the game got boring. And Gifford would, put the cards on the hotel bed and do offensive and defensive formations and practice his commentary. And Howard thought that, this is a guy who's really, really working and wants to do this well, which he did. And for that, I'll always respect Frank Gifford.
Right. And Frank got into some, not trouble, but bad publicity toward the end of his life.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He was found where he shouldn't have been.
In some other woman's pants.
Yeah, pretty much. and she was running a tape and a recorder, and his whole career at that point, maybe a bad pun, exploded.
Right. That's too bad. Anything on Meredith that comes to mind, Andy Don?
Well, I remember Howard, and I read all these books. I think I still have them all back in the house. There was the first one he wrote, then the second one, then the third one, where when he retired from ABC and he had nothing good to say about anyone. Then there was a later one that he wrote in the 90s, right before he died, that got little traction, but it's a very good book. It's called What's Wrong with Sport. But the second book, he couldn't say enough wonderful things about Meredith. When he was this wonderful, genuine guy. He was decent. He was kind. He was genuine. He was really what you saw was what you got. By the time he wrote the third book, it was Gifford and Meredith were trying to conspire to get Howard off of the show, and then you had the 1 year with O.J. and Howard thought very little of O.J. as a broadcaster. Pretty much had to, according to Howard, had to teach him everything. And he was really down on the jock thing and how all the years of ABC, how, they wanted him out because he was not of the ABC mold, so to speak. In other words, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant from either Ridgewood or Darien, and a corporate guy, and Howard was never that, and Howard just leveled on everybody. But that's what I think where he left Meredith. Now, whether they reconciled or not, I don't know. I know that he and Gifford became friendly again before Howard's passing.
That's good. A lot of years there, a lot of their reputation.
Oh yeah.
That show. Don Ohlmeyer, can you speak to him? You talked about some of the people that made Monday Night Football possible, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's the one that originally put the Jocks and Howard together.
I believe that's correct. It was Arledge who really developed that package. And Chet Forte out of Columbia, who really did a lot of the production and making that work. I mean, I know when we spoke to Arnie Wexler, he had mentioned that Chet Forte was a terrible problem gambler and got himself into all kinds of trouble, which is really a shame. I mean, really brilliant guy.
A guard from Columbia.
I think he was the quarterback. Chet Forte, I think he played quarterback for Columbia, and then developed all the.
I thought he played basketball all these years.
You may be right.
Didn't know that, but Columbia was the gem of the New York education system. That was probably the best school in New York.
Oh yeah, a lot of how many people came out of there or came out of NYU? Neil Simon came out of NYU. My good friend James B. Harris, whom I've interviewed on this network, Harris and Kubrick, he came out of there. And these are just hardworking GI Bill guys that gave us some of the best quality stuff we're ever going to see. And you're right. I'm reading here about Chet Forte. He was a basketball player out of Hackensack, New Jersey. And he was
that's stuck in my mind.
Yeah, and he was drafted by the Cincinnati Royals, but he never made the team. Well, I guess a team that has Jerry Lucas and Oscar Robertson's a little difficult to make.
Right. That team got more carpetbagging time than the Atlanta Braves. They've really been around. They started as Rochester, went to Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Sacramento after that. Shows that big league sports have not gotten it together to keep franchises intact, one night, in the middle of the night, and moved to Indianapolis, slap in the face to sports fans all over the country. And it's not just football.
It was terrible.
On it in baseball, it's horrible. I was one of those who was 11 years old when my favorite team growing up, the New York baseball Giants, moved to San Francisco. And everybody talks about the Dodgers and all the fans that were hurt by that. Giants fans were hurt too. Kids were hurt irreparably. There's a separation there that will never be made up for. And I think sports teams have and commissioners and leaders have an obligation to not move their franchises and not break kids' heart. And work around it. If you're going to give them a franchise, if the owners aren't doing the job, don't just let them move to another city. Have somebody come in and buy the team and make it work. But I'm harping. I'm sure Howard would harp the same way.
Well, and I think of Howard when he was entirely off on Sonny Werblin when the New York Football Giants left New York to go to Hackensack. And Sonny Werblin was saying, well, it's actually a better place to go to, and we're only 7 miles outside of Manhattan. And Howard and Sonny, who were very good friends, Howard got very angry with Sonny, and he said this was the same thing that O'Malley and Stoneham and Lou Perini and all these people had done, and he was ashamed of them, and it's absolutely positively right.
Was it Werblin or was Werblin a Jet?
Well, actually, I think Werblin was a Jet, but yet he built the stadium and got the Giants to come over to kind of help pay the bills. So it was that he was really involved in that because he contemplated the move of putting the Jets over and was complaining about how what a wreck Shea Stadium was, which sadly it was, and. And that led to the big famous fight between Ed Koch and Sonny Werblin over bathrooms. Actually, it was Sonny Werblin and Leon Hess who was actually the head of the Jets, and they were fighting over bathrooms, and it was but I go back to your place as an 11-year-old kid watching your team pack up and move to another coast. I love this team. Look at what they did to me.
Yeah, that was not fun as a kid, and I watched it. I came out here, ironically, to Northern California to spend my adult life, and I kind of took to the Giants. I've been a Met fan since their being, but I took to the Giants. I just feel a certain, I'm an apologist, let's put it that way. Well, over the last 30, 35 years, the last 10 years notwithstanding, they've had 20 years even now, they've had a great location, a great ballpark, a real gem. But before that, they came perilously close to moving 2 or 3 different times.
They did.
Once to Toronto, once to St. Petersburg, and there's a tremendous story that Peter Golenbach told me about their proposed move to St. Petersburg. The president of the National League at the time was Bill White, former New York Giant.
Yes.
And Bill White, when he played, the St. Louis Cardinals, where he was traded after he came back from the Army, and the Giants had Cepeda, Cubby coming up, they traded Bill White for Sam Jones. But before that, he was a St. Louis Cardinal, or after that, he was a St. Louis Cardinal ball player. And they were train in St. Petersburg. And the blacks were not permitted to stay in the same facility as the whites. The blacks couldn't go to parties and country clubs for the team.
That's right.
And he was very embittered by that. They blacks stayed what they call across the tracks, boarding houses, and families would take care of them. But, you know, that stuck in his craw for a long time. And when it came time to the Giants maybe moving to St. Petersburg, Bill White said, "Over my dead body," and he quit the deal. And it just, he knew of the heart of the fan in the South, in South Florida. This wasn't South Florida, but it was Florida. And that was one. I thought that was one of the most courageous things that he ever did. He took that stand, and I think it was Mike Piazza's dad who was trying to bring the Giants to St. Petersburg, but he screwed up the deal for him, and that's that story.
Well, and I do know that that situation you describe about housing, when Bill White was a very young New York Giants player, he was had a room in Willie Mays' house, and he and they would ride in together, and it was you know, and I think the whole thing that you know, Willie didn't want him like you know, in some crummy flop house. He wanted to protect the kid, which I thought was very, very nice.
I think they were up in New Rochelle now.
Yes, yeah, Willie lived in New Rochelle. And for a while he lived in Englewood, New Jersey. And then they moved west.
New Rochelle comes to mind. One of the greatest broadcasters ever was Marty Glickman.
Yes.
The 1936 track hero in the Olympics, didn't get to run in the Olympics, and he became a broadcaster, and he would do New Rochelle among other things. He did a variety of sports.
He would do the high school games on Saturday. You're absolutely right, on WPIX Channel 11 out of New York.
Right, and I think the man that told me about that years ago was Tony D'Angelo. So
yes.
To learn from you, Tony. I appreciate it a lot.
Marty had a, if you want to call it, a brief fling doing the TV sports on WNBC Channel 4 in New York. It really wasn't his thing. He was really a radio guy. He looked uncomfortable. He sounded a little uncomfortable. He was not a camera guy. And I think of, when you think of the Jockocracy, Kyle Rowe, for years and years and years, was a broadcaster on WNBC4 in New York, was actually, I think, Gifford's impetus for getting into the business, was extremely good and just very easygoing, and you know, gave you that kind of Jack Armstrong impression, you know. And the but Marty, that really it really was an odd fit for him. I kind of felt sorry for him.
Well, he became a guru for training analysts from all over the country.
Yes.
The affiliated analysts would come in and take an informal Marty Glickman course in broadcasting. And he became one of the most respected broadcasters going. And he was excellent. He did the Giants. He and Al DeRogatis teamed up on the radio to do an incredibly excellent job.
DeRogatis would know the plays before they were called. He was amazing. He actually got thrown off the air, from what I recall, because he was making references to sports lines. Today, of course, we have fantasy football.
I didn't remember that, but...
yeah, it was one team was playing another, and they were behind by... I guess they were behind by 6 points, and he said, well, if they get in field goal range, they could kick the field goal and beat the spread. We didn't hear from Al after that.
I wonder why you don't hear from Costas and Micah. why you continually hear from Costas and Michaels. Those are guys that cite the spread almost every week.
Oh, yeah, it's just, well, you see, this is me, and this is probably another show subject for another time. Maybe I watched too many Leo Gorcey movies growing up, but or I've seen New Rock and the All-American too many times, where a Chinese wall was supposed to be put between betting and the actual contest, because you didn't want the people in the actual contest to be the least bit influenced by what was taking place out there. And now we have it mainstream. Now here, like last week, say, and my NFL team is 4-13 or something like that, and I'm playing, and I'm a field goal kicker, and hey, I'm going to miss a couple because I know I'm not going to be back next year. It's like, you can't tell me that this stuff isn't going to happen, Zig.
Right, and especially in the new change in America, there is a greed in America that wasn't there in the 50s.
Oh, amazing.
When we grew up. I think it all starts at the top. You could cite whoever's in charge right now. I think that's going to change, what with the new Congress coming in. But it has become unbearable when you have, and it goes to big business, the church, government,
right through.
Everything.
It's right through. And I think that, yeah, and I think regardless of whatever you want to call it, religious, moral, political persuasion you're in, it's if you have a clear heart and a clear mind, and if you see it all from what it is all over the place, it's beyond wretched. Mm-hmm. It is beyond wretched.
Let me ask you, Tony, while I have you, you're the brain, what do you see as the end game for this administration? How do you think it's going to come down? Because it's going to come down. Changes are in the offing.
And you're asking me about where I think the current, whatever you want to call it, political administration and landscape.
How's it going to play out?
I mean, if I can't see.
It's just a big guess. It's not a right or wrong.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, I think so much of it hinges upon what we do not know, which is what were the particular evils created. And I think that where you've got 53 Republican senators, can you really get enough of them to do a Richard Nixon and say, ugh, we've just got to get rid of it? And I think that's all a case to the evidence. I think, honestly, truthfully, most people around me, most people I talk to, say that he's going to resign, or he'll resign in exchange for immunity or something. I see him more or less there under a stay of execution until the 2020 election. That's personally what I see, because I think it would take an awful lot to impeach him. And I think as far as the health of the country, and the thing that really concerns me is I just don't see it getting any better.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it would take a lot to impeach him. He fired Comey.
Yeah.
And I think that itself should have been checkmate a long time ago. That was clearly obstruction of justice. And I think that, maybe I'm feeling positive, but I think there are Republican senators that are slowly
no doubt
off the shelf.
No doubt. Well, Susan Collins came out yesterday and said that she wasn't going to support him on the budget thing. And
I think that's the beginning of the end for him. Senators losing favor with those senators, and as you say, it depends on what Mueller comes up with.
Yeah.
Mueller, I should know that. It's not Don Mueller, by the way. Mandrake. Mandrake would have hit a double, and it would have been all over. But this guy's, I think this guy's going to come up with stuff that links the Russian Connect. What I'm hoping, beyond hope, is that they can get him on some sort of treasonous offense, in which case his entire cabinet would have to resign, including Pence. And guess who's number 3 to become President of the United States?
The Speaker of the House.
Go down. Speaker of the House. And that turned just the other day, Nancy Pelosi, a person who I had some problems with when she took over as Speaker of the House in Bush Jr.'s second term, when he and Cheney were committing war crimes. And her philosophy was, we're not going to go after him for impeachment. And I think that she may be a little soft from that standpoint with Trump as well. That scares me.
Well, what amazes me as far as his administration, and again, I'm not speaking for him or against him. I mean, you know where I sit on presidents. It's like go back as far as you want. I think every single one I've found something I've really liked what they've done, or I've hated what they've done, and the past 3 or 4 I've found myself shaking my head more than not. Where I shake my head on our current president is everybody around him has gotten themselves in some incredible, terrible problem. Paul Manafort, Corey Lewandowski, his son is caught up. It's like, and I'm just sitting there saying, what did this guy do, for crying out loud? We all know that when you get up that high, it gets very, very, very corrupt. I understand that, but this is like, it will make me, as I sound right now, shake and quiver.
Right. Well, a lot of that has to do with the coffee and the fact that you're talking to me. I'll make you shake and quiver, Tony. Always have.
Yeah, you.
Tony.
But I get very concerned about this country, and as far as watching both houses of Congress not be able to do anything, and they're talking about shutting down the government for more time, and I mean it's ridiculous as to what's taking place now, and I think that's my biggest thing, Zig. It's where, quote unquote, is the national interest. I just don't see it.
Okay. Hey, Tony, talk to me about the fun you're having doing a podcast on my network.
This is so much fun, I'll tell you, because I can, and thank you for inviting me to do it. I can come in and I can do various mixes. I can whatever way I'm going to go on a particular day, I'm able to do it. I'm away from all the heavy infrastructure and the cameras and the lights and all that, and I'm just having a great time being amongst great people, all of varying persuasions.
I can't tell you how happy that makes me, Tony, because when I first started, I did podcasting for about 6 years before deciding to make a network out of it, and you were unbelievably instrumental in that.
Wow.
Setting up guests for me, encouraging me, tremendous. So the fact that you decided to do a show after I created the network, it just warms the cockles of an old Jew's heart.
And I think what's really neat is it encourages me to go back and dig up various historical things that we've all forgotten about, and even, and it gives us a moment of remembrance and perspective, like looking back and forward where we are, where we've been. I mean, there's the whole Trump scenario. Well, it kind of brings us back to what was happening with Nixon or LBJ, or it gives me that perspective in history, which I really do appreciate.
I appreciate you doing it, and the one thing, speaking of a perspective in history, we were talking about Howard. It was the anniversary of John Lennon's passing.
Yes.
Recently, a week or so ago. And I was drawn to the fact that it was Howard on Monday Night Football who really announced it to the world.
Yes, he did. And John Lennon was his friend, and it was really painful.
Yeah. John Lennon was everybody's friend.
Yeah.
We didn't even know it then. We didn't get his peace message at that point. But John Lennon, his loss really tore at the fabric of this country. It was terrible. We've had so many Kennedys. Where do you start? Where do you finish?
Bobby Kennedy. I mean, I remember that. I remember that night. I was listening on the radio. I was a 7th grader in Turner River Junior High School in Stamford, Connecticut, trying to figure out if Don Drysdale had eclipsed the scoreless inning streak. And I think my mother and father are yelling at me to go to bed. And I'm like, I just have to find out what happened. I have to tell everybody tomorrow before the newspapers come out. It's not like we had electronic news in those days. These kids are very spoiled. And I think it was like out of CBS in Chicago, fishing around the dial, up on the big hill in Stamford, Connecticut, pulling in all these AM stations. And I heard it's like, okay, I can go to bed. And I went into the bathroom, and I came out, and my mother, who was listening to the radio, wondering when I was going to go to bed, heard the bulletin about Bobby Kennedy being shot. And she, I got out of the bathroom, and I still remember her eyes, and she looked at me, and she said, they shot Bobby. Now I'm thinking, Bobby... I mean, they shot Bobby Valentine, who was the, hot shot. No, it was Bobby Kennedy. Yeah.
From Connecticut.
Yeah.
Don't you people from Connecticut? That would have been Kennedy was shot. That was sad.
Yeah.
But if Bobby Valentine was shot, whoa.
Boy, he managed that one year and got him into a series. He managed out of his hat. He was amazing.
He was amazing, and he was a pretty damn good ball player. He came up with the Dodgers.
Yes.
Went to Texas, if I'm not mistaken. He ran into a chain link fence.
Yes, he did.
A fence in Oakland, tore his ankle up in a Fran Tarkington-like manner. And I happened to have, when I was the Tops rep in the 80s, I ran into a guy, boy, I can't think of his name. His name was Berry. He was an outfielder and with the Angels, and he wasn't playing that day. He was sick or hurt or something, and Valentine was put into that game. It was against the A's, and I happen to remember that on television. Rare, as you say, we got rare. In those days, the days we grew up in, it was rare to see television like it is today, certainly. But I got a rare game, and I remember vividly Valentine going up and hurting his leg. That screwed up the rest of his career.
It really did. It really did, and it was sad. It really did. Well, I'm so pleased that you visited me today, and I'm very grateful that I've had you as a guest. And please tell all of the fans and all of the stations up and down your comfortably zoned Boss Radio Network where you can be heard.
Well, we're on the internet, and if you go to comfortablyzonedradio.com, you can, all of our offerings are listed. You can pick them out. You can bookmark them. You can forward them, your favorite shows, to your friends. And we have the advantage of being heard all the time. You can, internet radio is wonderful. You can download the podcast, you could play it later, you could share it with your friends, and the nice thing is that we are, for the most part, we're not controlled by commercialism. So we're going to give you everything in a straightforward, truthful manner. The podcasters we have on this network have opinions without being opinionated. And I think that's the key to our success.
Well, and you know, we're respectful, and we have discussions, and you know, we are actually respectful of one another, and we hold each other in high regard, and that's. I wish our Congress did that, frankly, but you know, they got to listen to our network.
Maybe the new one will.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you.
I understand. Tony, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Zig, it is a pleasure to be on the network. You take care now, and we'll talk soon.
Talk soon. Be well, my friend.
You too.
What feel you get from monkeys? You're swinging down the street and a wild beat starts to get you. You can't stop swinging with your bird, 'cause the beat you heard just won't let you. It's like swinging through the trees, running in the breeze. When you wear these boots, 'cause these are monkeys. Look at what feel you get from monkeys.
Monkey boots, inspired by the new heroes, the monkeys. Monkey boots, they open your eyes when you see them. They make you come alive when you wear them. Monkey boots from $7.99 to $11.99. And for girls, monkey tees, only $4.99. And only from Tom McCann.
Look at what feel you get from monkeys.
Now, here comes the music.
Do I look bothered?
Oh, you are awful, but I like you.
We thank Zig Tyko for being with us. It's always a fun conversation, and to share some recollections about Howard Cosell and the great sports broadcasting of days gone by. April 28th, 1967, some of the headlines taking place. NASA shakes up the Apollo program. This is after the horrible fatality that took place with the first Apollo mission. Lawrence Welk and Dr. Michael DeBakey win the Horatio Alger Awards. That's a 1 and a 2. Only some of you old guys are going to get that. General William Westmoreland said there's no end to the Vietnam War. Governor Nelson Rockefeller pushes a $2.5 billion transportation project. He's trying to bond it. A Negro woman, I'm not speaking pejoratively, this is what she was referred to. Her name, Mrs. Roberta W. Clayton, heads the YWCA. Expo 67, the Canadian World's Fair, is in Montreal. There are big sales in Corvettes, Grants, and Stearns in New York. In sports, Mickey Mantle homered to beat California at Yankee Stadium. And the WBA tournament organizes a number of heavyweight boxers in order to decide who is going to pick up the vacant Muhammad Ali crown. We'll be right back with more stuff right after this.
Hey, look alive! Everything lights up, makes you want to shout. Talk about happiness, that's what we are talking
about. We'll be right back with our world-famous baseball birthdays right after this. So pleased to have the boss in here of Boss Radio, Ralph Zig Tyko, talking about weighty matters of state. We can talk about weighty matters of state as much as we want, but everybody listening to this network will riot if I do not do our world-famous baseball birthdays. We don't want riots. We want peace. I'm like one of the members of the Hakawi tribe on F Troop. Hakawi, no fight. We love. So since we love, I am going to do the baseball birthdays. These are the birthdays of April 28th. Knuckleballer Charlie Huff, 25 years in major leagues, was 72 on his last birthday. Charlie could throw that knuckleball. Sandy Vance, a 1971 and 1972 Dodger pitcher. Two great Dodger names in his name, but he did not have a great Dodger career. From Pasadena High School, was 72 on his last birthday in April 28th. And get this, Charlie Vinson, 13 games with the 1966 California Angels and 1 home run, never to be heard from again, blew out 75 candles last April 28th. We wish Charlie Huff, Sandy Vance, and Charlie Vinson a happy birthday and many more years on Earth. We'll be right back with a lot more fun right after this.
They're winning! They're winning! They're winning in the new $90 game. They're winning at the knuckle. Winning at the knuckle.
You can by law.
They're winning! They're winning! Playing at the knuckle. Winning at the knuckle.
Special thanks to the boss of Boss Comfortably Zoned Radio, Ralph Tyko, my honored guest of the show. Also, many thanks to the people who made April 28, 1967 possible. Spencer Davis, Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, as he was known, Jim Morrison, Lawrence Welk, and Dr. Michael DeBakey. Remember the mission of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Take your slightly used children's books and donate them to a Project Head Start near you. Kids need to read, and kids need to pay attention to history, and that's why we do these shows. So you guys have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week with another show on Comfortably Zoned Boss Radio. Here's good day. Bye. See ya.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.